Hey, welcome to Night Whispers. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe, it really helps. Now, let's get into the stories. The road to Timber Ridge was lined with trees, their leaves a mix of red, orange, and yellow. It was beautiful, almost peaceful, and for a moment, it was easy to forget why we were all there. Alo, the one who brought us all together, said this would be our last camping trip before winter hit. I could tell everyone was excited, but there was a hint of something else in the air too, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. We arrived at the campsite just as the sun was dipping behind the hills. It was the perfect spot, a little clearing surrounded by tall trees with a view of the valley below. The air was crisp, but not too cold, and you could hear the rustling of leaves as the wind whispered through the branches. We set up our tents, laughing and joking the whole time. Sam and Mason were already trying to outdo each other, racing to see who could get their tent up first. Andy was making a fire pit, while Logan struggled with the cooler, swearing under his breath as he wrestled with the stubborn lid. Alo had this way of making everything feel like an adventure, and today was no different. He led us all in a cheer once the camp was set up, and we settled down around the fire. We grilled hot dogs and roasted marshmallows, sharing stories and laughing until our sides hurt. It was almost like we were kids again, and for a while, everything felt normal. But as the sun set and darkness crept in, the mood began to change. It wasn't anything obvious, just little things that didn't seem right. The air got colder, and the forest around us seemed to go quiet. I could have sworn I heard something in the distance, a faint sound, almost like laughter. I glanced at the others, but they didn't seem to notice. Or maybe they just didn't want to. "Did you hear that?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. Everyone turned to look at me. "Hear what?" Mason said, his voice steady but his eyes darting around. "I don't know. Just something weird. Like laughing." I felt silly saying it out loud, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Alo chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "It's probably just an animal or something. We're in the middle of the woods, remember? There are all kinds of creepy noises out here." We all laughed, but it was forced, like we were trying to convince ourselves that everything was okay. We went back to telling stories and joking around, but that feeling of unease stayed with me. It was like the woods were watching us, waiting. As the night went on, the noises got louder. This time, we all heard it. It wasn't just laughter anymore. There were screams and a howling sound that sent chills down my spine. We all fell silent, straining our ears to hear more. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves around us, but the sound seemed to come from deeper in the forest. We told ourselves it was just our imagination, or maybe it was the drinks we'd had earlier. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. The shadows around the campfire seemed to stretch longer, reaching out toward us, as if they had a mind of their own. I thought about suggesting we pack up and leave, but before I could say anything, Alo stood up. "I'm gonna grab some more firewood," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. As he walked off into the darkness, I had this sinking feeling in my gut. Something was out there, and it was watching us. The darkness wrapped around our camp like a heavy blanket. The fire crackled and popped, but it didn't seem as warm or bright as before. We all sat there, staring into the flames, trying to pretend we weren't nervous. Every little sound made me jump, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but none of us wanted to be the first to admit that we were scared. Alo had been gone for a while now, and I started to worry. I thought about calling out to him, but something stopped me. It was like a voice in my head telling me to stay quiet, to not draw any attention. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the others were on edge too. Suddenly, a loud laugh echoed through the woods, not far from our camp. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that made your skin crawl. We all looked at each other, eyes wide. This was no animal. This was something else. "Did you guys hear that?" Sam whispered, his voice shaking. We nodded. There was no denying it now. Something was out there. Something that shouldn't be. "We need to find Alo," Mason said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's been gone too long." Before we could decide what to do, we heard footsteps, slow and heavy, coming closer. I held my breath, straining my eyes to see past the flickering firelight. Then, at the edge of the camp, just within the circle of light, a figure appeared. It was an old woman. Her hair was long and tangled, hanging around her face like a curtain. She wore a tattered dress that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. But it was her face that terrified me the most. Her grin stretched unnaturally wide, like her mouth was too big for her face. And her eyes, oh God, her eyes, were just dark, empty voids. We all froze. No one said a word. We just stared at her, too scared to move or even breathe. "Hello?" Andy called out, his voice shaky. "Can we help you?" The old woman didn't answer. She just stood there, muttering something under her breath. It sounded like gibberish, words that didn't make sense. But there was something in her tone that made my blood run cold. It was like she was casting a spell or something. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Logan tried, stepping forward a little. "Do you need help?" She stopped muttering and looked at him, or through him. Her grin widened, and I felt like the ground was going to swallow me whole. And then it happened. Without warning, Sam, Mason, and Andy screamed. Their screams were like nothing I'd ever heard. Pure agony and terror. I turned to look at them, and what I saw will haunt me forever. Flames erupted from their bodies, scorching their clothes and skin. They flailed and writhed, but the fire didn't burn like normal fire. It was like their skin was boiling, blistering and peeling away as they crumbled to the ground in piles of ash. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was watch in horror as my friends were reduced to nothing but ashes scattered by the wind. Logan and I stood there, frozen in place, unable to process what was happening. The old woman stepped closer, her grin never faltering. She raised a hand and pointed at Logan, her eyes gleaming with dark power. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my legs wouldn't listen. Just then, a monstrous figure emerged from the woods behind her, towering and grotesque, a blend of a giant and a deer, with massive antlers and a hulking muscular body. It was a Wendigo, a creature from nightmares, and it was here, in front of us. The last thing I heard was Logan scream before I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. The sounds of their screams and the old woman's laughter chased me into the dark woods, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I ran blindly through the forest, my heart pounding in my ears. Branches scratched my face, and roots tried to trip me up, but I didn't care. I had to get away. Behind me, I could still hear Logan's screams, echoing through the trees. It was like the woods were alive with the sound of his agony, taunting me, reminding me that I left him behind. But what could I have done? My mind raced with questions and guilt, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't have saved him, not from that thing. I stopped, gasping for breath, and hid behind a tree. My whole body shook, and I fought the urge to vomit. What was that creature? It wasn't human, that much was clear. I peeked around the tree, trying to see if it was following me, but all I saw were shadows stretching out in the dark, their shapes twisting and turning like they were alive. Then I heard it, a low growling sound, like an animal but much, much worse. It sent shivers down my spine, and I pressed my back against the tree, hoping it would hide me. I held my breath, listening. The growling came closer, and with it, the sound of heavy footsteps. Each step made the ground shake slightly, like a giant was walking through the woods. I dared to look again, and there it was, the Wendigo. It was even more horrifying up close, with its massive antlers reaching up toward the sky and its body covered in matted fur and twisted muscles. Its eyes glowed in the dark, scanning the forest like it was searching for something, or someone, for me. Suddenly it stopped and sniffed the air, its head turning in my direction. I froze, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would give me away. The Wendigo's mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and it let out a bone-chilling scream. I bit my lip to keep from crying out, tears streaming down my face. This was it. It had found me. Just then, a loud roar filled the air, different from the Wendigo's scream. It was the roar of a motorcycle engine, cutting through the silence of the forest. The Wendigo turned its head toward the sound, and for a second it seemed scared. I blinked, not sure if I was dreaming or not. But then I saw him. A man on a motorcycle burst into the clearing, his bike roaring like a beast. He wore a gas mask, his face hidden, and carried a shotgun strapped to his back. At his side was a huge, fierce-looking wolf, its eyes locked onto the Wendigo. The man didn't hesitate. He pulled the shotgun from his back, aimed, and fired. The blast echoed through the forest, and the Wendigo howled in pain. It staggered back, but it wasn't done yet. The wolf sprang into action, leaping at the monster, teeth bared. The two creatures collided in a vicious battle, snarling and snapping at each other. The man kept firing at the Wendigo, driving it further back. The old woman appeared again, her face twisted in rage. She raised her hands, dark energy swirling around her, but the man was ready. He aimed his gun at her and fired, each shot forcing her to retreat. She screamed in fury, her voice high and shrill, but she couldn't match the man's power. "Run!" the man shouted at me, his voice muffled by the gas mask but full of authority. "Get out of here now!" I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. The sounds of the fight faded behind me, replaced by the pounding of my own footsteps and the rush of blood in my ears. I stumbled and fell, scrambling to get back up, my mind screaming at me to keep going. As I ran, I realized something. I wasn't just running from the Wendigo or the witch. I was running from the truth, from the horror of what I'd seen. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forget it, if I'd ever feel safe again. But I had to try. I had to survive. I ran like my life depended on it because it did. The forest around me was a blur of shadows and twisted branches. Every muscle in my body burned, but I couldn't stop. I could still hear the sounds of the battle behind me, the growls of the wolf, the gunshots, and the Wendigo's screams. They grew fainter as I put more distance between us, but that didn't make them any less terrifying. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, scraping my hands on the rocky ground. I bit back a cry, fear making my heart race even faster. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, trying to calm the wild beating of my heart. But there was no time. I had to get up. I had to keep moving. I scrambled to my feet, every part of me screaming to just give up. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I burst out of the trees and found myself on the gravel road where we had parked our car. My car. It was there, just a few yards away. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers shaking so badly I almost dropped them. Behind me, the woods were still dark and silent, but I knew they weren't empty. I knew what was lurking in the shadows. I glanced back one last time, and my heart nearly stopped. In the distance, back where the campsite was, I saw them. The Wendigo, still towering and monstrous, locked in a brutal fight with the wolf. The man with the gas mask stood between them and the old woman, his shotgun raised. The witch was screaming, her voice carrying on the wind like a curse. Her eyes found me, even from that far away, and I felt a chill go through me. She knew I was there. She knew I was escaping. The man fired his shotgun again, and the witch stumbled back, her dark power faltering. The Wendigo roared, the wolf's teeth sinking into its shoulder, dragging it to the ground. I had no idea who this man was or how he and his wolf could fight these monsters, but they were my only chance. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I yanked the car door open, jumped inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal, gravel flying up behind me as I sped down the road. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep the wheel steady, but I didn't care. I just had to get away. As I drove, the sounds of the forest faded, replaced by the steady hum of the car engine and the rapid thumping of my heart. I tried to make sense of what had happened, but it was like trying to piece together a nightmare. My friends were gone, burned, killed by some ancient evil that I didn't understand. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, but I was numb. My mind kept replaying the images, Sam, Mason, and Andy bursting into flames, Logan being torn apart, Alo's face as he realized we were in over our heads. And that creature, that thing with antlers that came out of the woods like it had been summoned from the darkest part of a nightmare. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the Wendigo charging after me. But there was nothing, just the dark, empty road stretching behind me. I let out a shaky breath, but then my eyes caught something else. For just a split second, I saw a figure, a shadowy shape with glowing eyes, standing on the road where I had just driven. It was watching me, and even though it wasn't moving, I could feel its presence reaching out, like it was marking me, like it wasn't done with me yet. I blinked, and it was gone. Just my imagination, I told myself, just my mind playing tricks after everything I'd seen. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. I stumbled into the police station, trying to explain what had happened, but my words came out jumbled and panicked. I knew they wouldn't believe me. Who would? But I had to try. I had to tell someone. As I sat there waiting for someone to listen, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. That somewhere out there, in the dark woods, those creatures were waiting. And that the next time, I might not be so lucky. I stepped off the bus, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the familiar sight of my hometown coming into view. Everything looked the same, yet different. The houses, the trees, even the old diner on the corner. They were all still there, but a heaviness hung in the air. I was excited to see my family, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my gut. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed the lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks. My parents' car was parked out front, but the house seemed quiet. Too quiet. I pushed open the door and called out, "Mom? Dad? I'm home." No answer. I dropped my bag by the door and headed into the living room. That's when I saw them. My parents were sitting on the couch holding each other. Mom's eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for days. Dad looked up at me, his face pale and drawn. "What happened?" I asked, my heart racing. "It's Tristan," Dad said, his voice cracking. "He's gone." I echoed, not understanding. "What do you mean, gone?" Mom burst into tears, burying her face in Dad's shoulder. He hugged her tighter, but his eyes stayed on me. "He went on a camping trip with his friends a few weeks ago. They said he wandered off and got lost. They couldn't find him." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Tristan, my little brother, lost? No way. But did they look for him? The police? Search parties? Dad nodded, but he looked away, staring at the wall. The authorities searched for days, but then the weather got bad. They had to call it off. They think he didn't make it. I stood there trying to wrap my head around what they were saying. Tristan was the most careful person I knew. He wouldn't just wander off. Something didn't add up. "I need to talk to his friends," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to know what really happened." "They're all shaken up," Mom whispered, finally lifting her head. "They're telling different stories. None of it makes sense." I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening. I'll make sense of it. Over the next few days, I met with Tristan's friends one by one. Each story was different. One said they were sitting around the campfire when Tristan suddenly got up and walked into the woods like he was in a trance. Another swore there was a sudden storm, and they got separated while trying to find shelter. But the worst one was Kyle, Tristan's best friend. He refused to look me in the eye, mumbling something about a figure they saw in the woods, a figure with glowing eyes. "That's crazy," I said, feeling my temper flare. "You're saying you saw some kind of monster out there?" Kyle just shrugged, his eyes darting around the room like he was scared of something, or someone. "I don't know, man. I'm just telling you what I saw, or what I think I saw." I left feeling more frustrated than ever. Nothing was making sense. If they all saw the same thing, why were their stories so different? What really happened to Tristan that night? Winter was settling in, and the search had been called off until spring. The woods were too dangerous to go into now, covered in ice and snow. But I couldn't just sit around and wait. I had to do something, anything to find out the truth. Because deep down, I knew one thing for sure. My brother didn't just wander off. Something, or someone, took him. And I was going to find out what it was, no matter what. I drove into the town, a place that felt like it was frozen in time. Old buildings lined the main street, their paint chipped and faded. People stood on the sidewalks staring at me as I passed by, their eyes cold and unfriendly. I tried to ignore it, but a shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't the warm, welcoming place I had imagined. It felt off. I parked in front of the town's only motel, a rundown place with a flickering neon sign. As I got out, an old man sitting on a bench nearby watched me closely. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, almost to himself. "Excuse me?" I asked, taking a step toward him. He shook his head, looking past me, like he didn't want to be seen talking to me. "This town, it's not safe, especially for outsiders." I frowned. "I'm not here to cause trouble, I'm just looking for answers about my brother." The old man glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. "You won't find any answers here, just more questions. You should leave while you still can." I opened my mouth to ask more, but he turned away, pulling his hat down over his eyes. It was clear he wasn't going to say anything else. Frustrated, I headed into the motel to check in, but his words stuck with me. What was this town hiding? Later that day, I went to the local diner to grab some food and hopefully some information. The waitress gave me a tight-lipped smile when I mentioned Tristan's name, but her eyes quickly darted away. The other customers stopped talking and glanced over at me, their expressions guarded. "Look, I just want to know if anyone saw my brother the night he disappeared," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He was camping near the forest with his friends. The waitress bit her lip, looking around like she was making sure no one else could hear. "You shouldn't go poking around," she whispered. "People here don't like it when outsiders ask questions. It's better to let some things be." Before I could press her for more, the door to the diner swung open, and a tall, middle-aged woman in a ranger uniform walked in. She glanced around, her eyes locking onto mine for a split second before moving on. Something about her seemed different from the rest of the townsfolk. Maybe she knew something. I waited until she sat down at the counter, then approached her. "Excuse me, are you with the Forest Service?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked at me for a long moment before nodding. "Name's Ranger Evans. You must be the brother looking for answers." "Yeah," I replied, surprised she knew who I was. "Can you help me?" She motioned for me to sit. "There are things about this place you don't understand," she began, her voice low. "Things the townspeople are too scared to talk about." "What kind of things?" I asked, leaning in closer. She hesitated, then continued. "There's an old legend about the forest, about a creature that's lived there for years. Some say it's a Wendigo, a monster born from dark magic and hunger. People who venture too close to its territory, they don't always come back." My heart pounded in my chest. "You're saying my brother and his friends went into its territory?" She nodded. "They went near Green Peak Lookout Tower. That's the heart of its territory. And no one who goes there comes back the same, if they come back at all." I felt a chill run through me, but I had to know more. How do I stop it? How do I find out what happened to Tristan? Ranger Evans glanced around again, then slid a small folded map across the counter to me. "This is a map to the tower. If you're really set on going, this will help you find it. But be careful. There are things in those woods that don't want to be found." I took the map, my hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," I said. "I'll be careful." As I left the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something much bigger and much more dangerous than I had ever imagined. But I had no choice. I had to know what happened to my brother, no matter the cost. I started the hike to Green Peak early in the morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no birds singing, no rustling of leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. The silence was eerie, like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something. As I climbed higher up the mountain, the air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I checked the map Ranger Evans had given me, trying to stay on the path she marked. Every so often I'd find a broken branch or a piece of trash that made me think of Tristan. He'd been here. I just knew it. After a few hours of hiking, I reached a clearing. In the middle of it stood the Green Peak Lookout Tower, looming against the gray sky. It was old and abandoned, its wood dark and weathered. Something about it made my skin crawl, but I had to go inside. I had to know. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped in. The air inside was musty and stale, like no one had been here in years. The floor was covered in dust and leaves, and broken furniture was scattered around. As I looked around, I saw marks on the walls, deep scratches, like something with claws had been here. My stomach twisted. I climbed the stairs to the second level, my heart pounding louder with each step. At the top, I found a small room, and in the middle of it was something that made my blood run cold. Tristan's watch. The one Grandpa had given him. I picked it up, my hands shaking. It was broken, the glass face shattered. What had happened here? Suddenly the wind outside picked up, howling around the tower. I heard a noise like a low growl, coming from somewhere in the woods. I froze, straining to hear it again, but all I could hear was the wind. I backed away from the window, trying to calm my racing heart. Then, there was a loud bang from downstairs. I jumped, almost dropping the watch. My mind was racing. Was it just the wind? Or was something else out there? I gripped the silver dagger the shaman had given me, trying to steady my nerves. I crept down the stairs, every muscle in my body tense. When I reached the bottom, I saw the door had blown open, slamming against the wall. I stepped outside, scanning the tree line, but all I saw was darkness and fog. Then I heard it again, the growl, closer this time. My breath caught in my throat. I turned around, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the fog. It was tall and hunched, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. It stared at me, and I felt a wave of pure terror wash over me. The figure took a step closer, and I stumbled back, raising the dagger in front of me. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice shaking. But it didn't listen. It moved closer, its eyes never leaving mine. I could see it clearly now, and it was worse than I could have ever imagined. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its mouth was twisted into a gruesome grin, showing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. It opened its mouth and let out a sound that was half growl, half laugh. "Tristan," it hissed, its voice a horrible mix of human and something else. I remember him. He tasted delicious. Rage and fear boiled up inside me. "You're lying," I screamed, lunging at it with the dagger. But it moved faster than anything I'd ever seen, dodging out of the way. It circled around me, laughing, its eyes glowing brighter. "You came all this way to find the truth," it said. "Well, here it is. I'm the truth. And now, you're mine." I backed up, my heart pounding in my ears. I had to get out of here, but there was nowhere to run. The storm was closing in, the wind whipping around us. I gripped the dagger tighter, preparing to fight. I didn't know if I could win, but I had to try. For Tristan. The creature lunged at me, and I swung the dagger with all my strength. It let out a shriek as the silver blade sliced into its flesh, and I felt a surge of hope. Maybe I could beat this thing. Maybe I could survive. But as the storm raged on, I knew this was only the beginning. The fight was far from over, and the darkness was closing in. I stumbled back into town, my clothes torn and my body aching from the fight. The storm had finally passed, but the sky was still dark, the sun hidden behind thick clouds. I felt numb, barely able to process what had just happened. I had killed it, the Wendigo, but something still didn't feel right. I made my way to the shaman's cabin on the edge of town, my legs trembling with each step. He was the only one who might have answers. When I got there, I banged on the door, my heart racing. The shaman opened the door slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "You've returned," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of something else. Worry, maybe. "I killed it," I blurted out, my voice shaky. "The Wendigo, it's dead." The shaman's face darkened, and he stepped aside to let me in. I followed him into the small, dimly lit room, my mind spinning. "You don't understand," he said quietly as he sat down. "By killing the Wendigo, you've taken on its curse." I stared at him, my stomach dropping. "What are you talking about?" He looked at me with sad, tired eyes. "The Wendigo is not just a creature, it's a curse, a spirit of hunger and madness. When you killed it, the spirit didn't die. It moved on. To you." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not true. I don't feel any different." The shaman sighed. "Not yet. But it's already begun. The hunger will start soon, and then the changes. You must fight it, or it will consume you." A chill ran through me. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, I could already feel it. A gnawing sensation in the pit of my stomach, something dark and cold. I swallowed hard, trying to push it down. "Is there a way to stop it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly. "There is one way. You must take your own life before the transformation is complete. It's the only way to break the cycle." I felt like the room was spinning. Was this really happening? Could I really be turning into the very monster I had fought? I looked down at my hands, expecting to see claws forming, but they were still normal, for now. I can't just give up," I said, my voice trembling. "There has to be another way." The shaman's eyes softened. "I'm sorry. I wish there was. But once the curse takes hold, it cannot be undone. You have to decide quickly, before it's too late." I stood up, my legs feeling weak. I couldn't stay here. I needed to think. I needed to be alone. "I need to go," I muttered, heading for the door. "I need to figure this out." As I stepped outside, the cold wind hit me like a slap in the face. I looked around, the town seeming even darker than before. The hunger was growing, a small but steady whisper in the back of my mind, urging me to give in, to feed. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I wandered through the town, my mind racing with everything the shaman had said. I couldn't believe it, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore it. What if he was right? What if I was becoming the very thing I had hunted? I found myself at the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness. I could feel it calling to me, pulling me in. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to run into the woods and disappear. I had to make a choice. The shaman's words echoed in my mind. "You must take your own life before the transformation is complete." Could I do it? Could I end this before I became a monster? A wave of nausea hit me, and I doubled over, gasping for breath. The hunger was getting stronger, the whispers louder. I needed to decide, and fast. As I stood there, staring into the darkness, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know if I could fight it. I didn't know if I wanted to. And that thought scared me more than anything else. I turned away from the forest, the decision still looming over me like a shadow. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. But I didn't know how long I could hold on. And as I walked back into the town, I felt the darkness closing in around me, the hunger growing stronger. The cycle wasn't over. It was just beginning, and I was afraid of what I might become. People don't really understand what hunger means. They think it's just about needing food when you're hungry. But my grandfather always told me that hunger is something more, something darker. He used to say that hunger could turn into a monster, one that's always waiting, always watching, especially in the deep forests of the north. It wasn't just the kind of hunger that made your stomach growl. This hunger was evil. Grandpa had a story he would tell, one that scared all of us. no matter how many times we heard it. It was about a creature called the Wendigo. He said this creature was more than just a legend. It was a real thing that lived in the cold, dark woods. He told us that the Wendigo was always hungry, never satisfied, no matter how much it ate. That's why our family never went into the northern forests during winter. We were all too afraid of what might be lurking there. When Grandpa was young, he went on a trip to Pine Valley with his brother. It was the middle of winter, and everything was covered in snow. The trees were huge, and looked like they touched the sky. It was beautiful, in a way that made you forget how dangerous the woods could be. At first, everything seemed perfect. The sun was shining, and they saw deer and rabbits running around. They felt like they were in some kind of winter wonderland. But as the day went on, things started to change. The sun went down, and the forest got really quiet. It was too quiet, like the animals knew something bad was coming. Grandpa said it was like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then it got cold. Really cold. Not the kind of cold where you just need a thicker jacket, but the kind that makes your bones hurt. They should have turned back then, but they didn't. They decided to keep going, thinking they could handle whatever the woods threw at them. Grandpa said they weren't scared of anything back then, but that was before they heard the scream. It wasn't like any animal they knew. It was high-pitched and haunting, echoing through the trees. They tried to tell themselves it was just the wind, but they knew that wasn't true. As they kept walking, they felt like they were being watched. They couldn't see anything, but they knew something was out there. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the shadows grew longer. Every snap of a twig made them jump. Grandpa's brother joked that they were just spooking themselves, but Grandpa wasn't so sure. He felt a chill run down his spine, like something was breathing down his neck. Then they saw it. Just a glimpse between the trees. A tall, skinny figure with eyes that glowed in the dark. Grandpa tried to convince himself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, he knew what it was. It was the Wendigo, the monster from the stories, and it was hungry. They stopped, frozen in place, not sure what to do. The figure moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate. Grandpa could see it better now, a gaunt face, hollow eyes, and antlers that looked almost human. It was like nothing he had ever seen, and he knew they were in serious danger. As night fell, the forest around us changed. What had seemed beautiful and magical during the day turned into something dark and scary. The trees that had looked so tall and peaceful now seemed to close in on us, their branches reaching out like claws. It felt like the whole forest was watching us, waiting for something. "We should head back," I said to my brother. But he shook his head. "It's just the dark messing with us," he replied, trying to sound brave. "We've been out here 100 times. I nodded, but something didn't feel right. The air was so cold, colder than anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just a chill, it was like the cold was alive, wrapping around us and squeezing tight. I pulled my coat closer and tried to ignore the way my breath hung in the air like a ghost. Then, we heard it. A scream that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human either. It was something in between. A sound that echoed through the trees and made my blood run cold. My brother and I froze, our eyes scanning the darkness around us. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know," my brother said, but I could hear the fear in his voice. He didn't sound so brave anymore. We stood there for what felt like hours, straining to hear any other sounds. But the forest had gone completely silent. Not even the wind was blowing. It was like everything had stopped to listen. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My brother nodded, his eyes wide. "Yeah, I saw it." It was a figure moving between the trees, tall and thin. It moved so fast that I almost thought I was imagining it. But then I saw it again, closer this time. It was tall and skinny, with arms that were too long and a head that was all wrong. And its eyes, they glowed in the dark, staring right at us. "We need to go," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. My brother nodded, but we were both too scared to move. The figure kept getting closer, moving silently through the trees. It stopped just a few feet away from us, and now I could see it clearly. It was like a nightmare come to life. It had antlers, but they were twisted and broken. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes were hollow and black, like two empty pits. It opened its mouth, and I thought it was going to scream again, but it didn't. Instead, it just stood there, staring at us with those horrible eyes. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the air itself was being sucked out of my lungs. My brother grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my trance. "Run!" he shouted, pulling me with him. We took off through the forest, our feet slipping on the snow and ice. I could hear it behind us, moving faster than any human could. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We stumbled and tripped, branches scratching our faces and grabbing at our clothes. The cold air burned my lungs, but I didn't stop. We had to get away. We had to escape. But no matter how fast we ran, the thing behind us was faster. It was getting closer, and I knew there was no way we could outrun it. Then my brother fell. I turned back to help him, but it was too late. The creature was already there, looming over him, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do something, but I was frozen in place, too scared to move. The last thing I saw was my brother's terrified face before the creature lunged at him, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of sharp yellow teeth. I turned and ran, the sound of my brother's screams echoing in my ears, knowing I was leaving him behind. I ran as fast as I could, branches whipping at my face, snow crunching under my boots. My brother's screams echoed in my ears, mixing with the pounding of my heart. I didn't know where I was going. I just had to get away. I had to escape that thing, that monster, the Wendigo. It felt like the forest was closing in around me, the trees twisting and bending to block my path. The darkness was so thick that I could barely see where I was going. My flashlight had fallen when I ran, leaving me in almost complete darkness. I stumbled over roots and rocks, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The creature was behind me. I could feel it, a cold presence chasing me through the trees. I didn't dare look back. Every part of me was screaming to just keep running, to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. But no matter how fast I ran, I knew it was still there, following me. Its footsteps were silent, but its presence was like an icy hand on the back of my neck, urging me to keep moving. I didn't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and twist in the dark. Minutes felt like hours, and every second was filled with terror. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. I kept hearing my brother's screams in my head, mixed with the memory of that horrible creature. Finally, I saw a break in the trees up ahead. I stumbled into a clearing, collapsing onto the ground, gasping for breath. For a moment, I thought I was safe. Maybe I had lost it. Maybe the Wendigo was gone, but as I lay there, the coldness around me deepened. I looked up, and my blood turned to ice. It was there at the edge of the clearing, standing among the trees. Its hollow eyes stared at me, glowing faintly in the dark. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I was too scared to move, too scared to even breathe. It just stood there, watching me, like it was waiting for something. I fumbled for the small pistol my brother had insisted we bring, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I pointed it at the creature, my finger on the trigger. "Stay back," I shouted, though my voice was barely more than a whisper. The Wendigo didn't move. It just stared at me with those empty eyes. I fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest. The Wendigo let out a scream, a sound so terrible it made my skin crawl. It wasn't just its scream. It was like 1,000 voices all crying out at once, voices full of pain and hunger and anger. I heard my brother's voice in that scream, and it nearly broke me. The creature staggered back, clutching its shoulder where I had hit it. For a second I thought maybe I had hurt it. Maybe I could escape. But then it started to move again, its body twisting and jerking in unnatural ways. It was like the bullet hadn't even slowed it down. I realized then that there was no escaping this thing. It was more than just a creature. It was hunger itself, a force that could never be stopped. I forced myself to my feet and ran again, my whole body shaking with terror. The forest was a blur around me, trees and shadows blending together as I stumbled through the dark. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving, keep running. My brother's screams echoed in my mind, mixing with the sound of the creature's horrible cry. I burst out of the trees and fell onto a snow-covered road. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. A car's headlights appeared in the distance, and I waved my arms frantically, screaming for help. The car screeched to a stop, and I was pulled inside. The driver was shouting, asking what had happened, but I couldn't speak. All I could do was point back towards the forest, where the darkness still lingered like a heavy cloud. As we drove away, I looked back one last time. The Wendigo was gone, but I knew it was still out there, somewhere in the woods, always hungry, and I knew I would never be able to forget what I had seen. The memory of its hollow eyes and the sound of its terrible scream would haunt me forever. Even though years have passed since that night, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Grandpa was right about the Wendigo. It wasn't just a monster in the woods. It was something more, something that had a way of getting into your head and making you feel its hunger. I tried to forget it, to move on with my life, but every winter, when the nights grow long and cold, I can feel it out there, still watching, still waiting. Grandpa's warnings play in my mind like a broken record, telling me to stay away from the northern forests. But now, standing at the edge of the very woods that nearly killed me, I can't turn back. I have to know if it's still there, if it's still hunting. Something inside me has to see it again, to know for sure if it was real or just a nightmare. I take a deep breath and step into the trees, my flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. The forest is silent, just like before. Each step feels like it echoes, as if the trees themselves are whispering my presence to the thing that haunts these woods. The deeper I go, the colder it gets. My breath fogs in front of me, but it doesn't drift away. It just hangs there, frozen in the air like a ghost. I feel the same chill crawling up my spine, the same dread sinking into my bones. I reach the old campsite where it all happened. The snow has covered most of the signs of that night, but I can still see the faint outline of where we had set up our tent, where my brother had stood before the Wendigo took him. The memories flood back, and I have to fight the urge to turn and run. But I came here for a reason. I have to know if it's still out there. The wind picks up, howling through the trees. I hear a rustling sound and spin around, my flashlight beam darting across the trunks. There's nothing there, but I can feel eyes on me, watching from the shadows. My heart pounds in my chest, but I force myself to stay calm. I can't run now. Not again. Then, from the darkness, I hear it, a faint whisper, like the rustling of leaves. It's my brother's voice calling my name. My blood turns to ice. I know it can't be him, but I hear it clear as day. Come closer, it whispers, the words stretching and warping in the cold air. I take a step back, my hands shaking, the flashlight trembling in my grip. A shape moves in the shadows, and there it is, just like before. The Wendigo. It's even more terrifying than I remember. Its eyes glowing in the dark, its body gaunt and twisted. It steps forward, and I see the hunger in its eyes, the endless, unquenchable hunger that will never stop. It opens its mouth, but instead of the scream, I hear my brother's voice again, mixed with others, all crying out from deep inside the creature. I want to run, but my legs feel like they're glued to the spot. The Wendigo moves closer, its eyes boring into mine. I hear the whispers growing louder, and I realize it's speaking to me in voices I know, the voices of the people it's consumed. My brother's voice is the loudest, telling me to run, to get away, but I can't move. The creature stops just a few feet from me, its eyes staring into mine. Hunger never ends, it whispers, its voice a chilling mix of every soul it's devoured. I know then that this isn't just about me. The Wendigo doesn't just want to kill. It wants to consume, to become part of me, to make me part of its endless hunger. I raise my flashlight, shining it directly into its eyes. For a moment it recoils, the light cutting through the darkness. But then, it lets out a horrible, echoing scream that makes my blood run cold. I turn and run, the sounds of its cries following me through the forest. I don't stop until I burst out of the woods and collapse onto the snow-covered ground. I look back, but the Wendigo is gone. The forest is silent again, but I know it's not over. It will never be over. The Wendigo is still out there, always hunting, always hungry. And no matter where I go, I know it will always be watching, waiting for the chance to feed again. Every year, on the 1st of November, I perform my own little ritual. It's nothing fancy, just a shot of whiskey. It's the only drink I allow myself since my mom drank herself to death. I can see the worry in my wife Margaret's eyes, but she never asks why I do it. She knows it's about something I'd rather not talk about. Tonight, the whiskey burns as it goes down, just like it always does. It brings back memories from a long time ago, memories I'd rather forget. But they come back every November, like clockwork. Memories from when I was a forest ranger in the Rocky Mountains, back in the fall of 1991. I was young, and thought nothing could scare me back then. I was wrong. It was late in the season, and the trails were almost empty. Most visitors had left, probably because of the storms that had been rolling through. My boss told me to clear some of the paths after a big storm had hit the area. The trees were down, and branches were everywhere. It was just me and Jack, my fellow ranger, out there most days. One morning, while we were at the ranger station, a guy burst through the door. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His name was Carl Jensen, and he was a mess. His clothes were soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, and his eyes. Those eyes were wild with fear. He kept babbling, saying something about "it's still out there." We couldn't make much sense of what he was saying. After we calmed him down a bit, he started making more sense. He had come all the way from Phoenix with his friends Mike and Lisa. They were here to hike, just like a lot of people do. But something went wrong. His friends disappeared, vanished into thin air. Carl was sure something took them. He kept pointing at a spot on the map, a place deep in the mountains, far from any marked trail. Jack and I exchanged glances. It didn't make sense, but we couldn't just ignore it. We had to check it out, especially if there were 2 people missing. We called in Sheriff Tom for backup, just in case this was more than we could handle. Tom was a tough guy, someone you wanted around in a pinch. Together we grabbed our gear and headed out, following Carl's directions into the wild. The further we went, the quieter it got. The trees closed in around us, and the light seemed to fade, even though it was only afternoon. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I tried to focus on the trail, but my mind kept wandering back to Carl's terrified face, and those words he kept repeating. "It's still out there." We walked for hours, and just when I thought maybe Carl had been imagining things, we found it. An old, crumbling hunting cabin, hidden in the woods like it had been waiting for us. It was the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were right on top of it. We stood there for a moment, staring at the dark entrance. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. We had no idea what we were about to find inside, but whatever it was, I had a feeling it would change everything. We set off into the forest, following the path Carl had pointed out. Sheriff Tom led the way with Jack and me close behind. Carl's story echoed in my mind, but I kept telling myself it was just nerves. The trees around us were tall and thick, their branches reaching out like fingers, blocking out the sun. The deeper we went, the darker it got, even though it was still daytime. It felt like the woods were closing in on us. There was this heavy, silent feeling that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to shake it off, but every step felt like we were being pulled further away from safety. I glanced over at Jack. He had this determined look on his face, but I could tell he was uneasy too. Tom kept his eyes on the trail ahead, his hand resting on the gun at his side. None of us spoke. It was like we didn't want to break the quiet around us, like we were afraid of what might happen if we did. After what felt like hours, we finally saw it. A small, run-down cabin hidden in the trees. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, maybe even decades. The roof was sagging, and the walls were covered in moss and vines. I don't know why, but just looking at it sent a chill down my spine. It was like the cabin was waiting for us. Jack stepped forward, pushing open the door. It creaked loudly, echoing through the stillness. Inside it was dark and smelled of damp wood and something else, something I couldn't quite place. We lit our flashlights and stepped in, one by one. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and dust filled the air with every step we took. There were old hunting tools scattered around, and on one wall there was a drawing. It was made with charcoal, and it showed a figure, tall and thin, with long twisted limbs, and a face that was more beast than human. My stomach twisted as I looked at it. I had heard stories about creatures like this, but they were just that, stories. But this drawing, it looked too real, like someone had seen this thing with their own eyes. Tom cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We should look around," he said, his voice shaky. "See if there's any sign of Mike or Lisa." We spread out, searching the cabin and the area around it. That's when we found him. Mike. He was outside, leaning against a tree, his body torn apart in a way that made me want to look away and throw up. But it was his face that really got to me. It was calm, peaceful even, like he hadn't felt a thing. Jack cursed under his breath, and Tom turned pale. None of us said anything for a while. What could we say? We had found one of them, but there was no sign of Lisa, and we still didn't know what had happened. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't something I could explain, but I knew we weren't alone out here. We headed back into the cabin, feeling the weight of what we had just seen pressing down on us. The wind started to pick up outside, howling through the trees, but inside it was quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something that didn't want us here. And as we sat there, trying to figure out what to do next, I couldn't help but think that maybe we had made a terrible mistake coming out here. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the old cabin walls. We sat in the middle of the room, our backs to each other, trying to keep an eye on every corner. My hands were shaking, but I gripped my flashlight tightly, ready to use it as a weapon if I had to. Sheriff Tom was whispering to himself, something about getting out of here alive. Jack was the only one who seemed calm, though I could see the tension in his eyes. Then we heard it, a creaking sound coming from outside. My heart skipped a beat. We all turned our heads toward the door. The lantern hanging on the porch began to sway, but there was no wind. Something was moving out there. Something we couldn't see. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, making shapes that made my skin crawl. "Stay quiet," Jack whispered. He slowly got up, moving toward the door. I wanted to stop him, tell him it was too dangerous, but my voice wouldn't work. I watched as he peeked through the crack in the door. His face went pale, and he turned back to us with wide eyes. "It's right outside," he said, barely loud enough for us to hear. Before we could react, the door burst open with a loud bang. Something huge and fast rushed inside, slamming into Jack and dragging him out into the darkness before we could even move. His scream was cut short, leaving nothing but the sound of the wind and the creaking of the door as it swung back and forth. Tom and I stared at the empty doorway, frozen in fear. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. It moved so fast, like a shadow with claws and teeth. I felt sick, my stomach twisting into knots. Jack was gone, just like that. "We need to barricade the door," Tom shouted, snapping me out of my shock. We grabbed what we could, an old table, a chair, some broken boards, and shoved them against the door. Our hands were shaking so bad it was hard to hold on to anything. My heart was pounding in my chest, so loud I thought it might explode. We backed into the corner of the room, keeping our eyes on the door. For a moment it was quiet. Then we heard it, a voice, Jack's voice, calling out from the darkness. "Help me. Please, help me," it said, sounding weak and scared. But something about it was off. The tone was all wrong, like someone was trying to copy his voice but didn't quite know how. "That's not Jack," I whispered, more to myself than to Tom. The stories I'd heard about creatures in the woods came flooding back. Creatures that could mimic voices to trick their prey. My hands were cold with fear. The thing outside was trying to lure us out. Tom looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice shaking. I didn't know what to say. My mind was spinning and all I could think about was getting out of here alive. Then it hit me. The creature's weakness was fire. I grabbed the lantern and some old rags lying in the corner. "We're going to burn it," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Tom nodded, though I could see he was terrified. We soaked the rags in lantern fuel, and I lit them with a match. The flames flickered to life, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. The voice outside changed again, this time sounding like a woman's, Lisa's voice. "Please help me," it pleaded. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a creature. It was Lisa, twisted into this monster by whatever had happened to her out here. I felt my resolve harden. We couldn't save her, but we could stop this thing from getting us. We threw the flaming rags at the door, setting it ablaze. The fire spread quickly, the heat pushing us back into the corner. The creature outside screeched in fury, its inhuman wail filling the night air. We waited, hoping the flames would drive it away. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The flames spread fast, the heat scorching our faces as the cabin caught fire. The wood crackled and popped, and thick black smoke started to fill the room. Tom and I had no choice. We had to get out of there before we burned alive. But the thought of going outside where that thing was waiting for us made my blood run cold. "We have to move," I shouted over the roar of the flames. Tom was already coughing, his eyes red and watery from the smoke. We grabbed what little gear we had left and made a break for it, bursting out the back door and into the dark forest. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, a shocking contrast to the blazing heat of the cabin. We stumbled over the roots and rocks, our legs heavy with fear and exhaustion. I could hear the creature screeching somewhere behind us, its cries filled with rage. It wasn't done with us yet. "Keep running," I yelled at Tom, though I could barely breathe myself. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I was too scared of what I might see. We ran blindly through the trees, the light from the burning cabin casting eerie shadows that twisted and moved like living things. The ground was uneven, and I tripped more than once, catching myself just before I fell. Every sound made me jump. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, even the pounding of my own footsteps. Tom was ahead of me, moving faster now that we were out in the open. But I could tell he was just as scared as I was. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes wide with panic. It felt like we were being chased by a nightmare, something we couldn't escape no matter how fast we ran. Then, the forest around us grew quiet, unnaturally so. The creature's cries had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I skidded to a halt, grabbing Tom's arm to stop him too. We stood there, gasping for breath, listening. The only sound was the crackling of the cabin burning in the distance. "Where is it?" Tom whispered, his voice shaking. I shook my head, not daring to speak. I didn't know, and that was the worst part. It could be anywhere, watching us, waiting to strike. My eyes darted around the darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of movement, but there was nothing, just shadows and the flicker of firelight far behind us. For a split second I thought maybe we had escaped, that maybe the fire had scared it off. But deep down, I knew better. This thing wasn't scared of anything, not even fire. It was still out there, fighting, biding its time. "Let's keep moving," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. We turned and started walking, slower this time, every step feeling like it could be our last. My nerves were on edge, every muscle in my body tense, and ready to run at the slightest hint of danger. But we made it. Somehow we stumbled out of the forest and into the clearing near the ranger station. I could see the lights in the distance, a beacon of safety after the nightmare we had just lived through. We ran the last stretch, our legs heavy and our hearts racing. We burst through the door of the station, startling the few rangers who were still there. They stared at us in shock as we collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Tom was babbling, trying to explain what had happened, but none of them understood. How could they? We barely understood it ourselves. The next day a search party went back to the cabin. They found the place burned to the ground with nothing left but ashes and charred wood. Jack's remains were found outside, but there was no sign of Lisa. No creature. Just empty woods and silence. They called it an accident, said we must have gotten lost and panicked. But I know the truth. I saw it with my own eyes. It wasn't an accident, and we weren't just lost. There's something out there in those woods, something that shouldn't exist. Even now, as I sit here with my shot of whiskey, I can't forget. I hear the whispers at night, feel the eyes watching me from the shadows. I know it's still out there, waiting. And one day, it might come back. The thought sends a chill down my spine, a reminder that no matter how far I run, some nightmares never end. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope tonight's stories kept you company in the dark. Sleep well, and if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe. Good night, and see you in the next one.